The North Atlantic in 1942 was a place of shadows and danger. Convoys of merchant ships crept through cold, gray seas, carrying vital supplies from America to Britain. Every journey was a gamble. Hidden beneath the fog and the rolling waves, German U-boats prowled, waiting to strike. For every convoy that made it safely, others vanished without a trace, swallowed by the ocean and the war. At the heart of this struggle was a quiet, curious mind. Dr. Arthur Rowland, a British scientist whose ideas many considered strange, almost reckless. He worked in a modest laboratory on the outskirts of London, surrounded by optical equipment, sketches, and prototype models. While others in the Navy focused on guns, sonar, and radar, Rowland's attention was elsewhere. He studied light, reflection, and perception. To him, the sea was a canvas, and ships were shapes that could be hidden, not just defended. His colleagues were skeptical. "A ship is massive," one officer said during a briefing. "How do you propose to make it invisible?" Rowland simply smiled. "Not invisible," he replied. "Hard to see, misleading to the eye. That is enough." The idea seemed almost absurd. At a time when war was measured in tonnage sunk and lives lost, one man proposed painting ships in confusing patterns, stripes, gradients, and angles designed to break up the shape of a vessel, to trick the submarine captain's eyes. The term he gave it was dazzle camouflage. Critics snorted, claiming it was nothing more than painting a ship like a zebra, a folly for artists rather than strategists. But Rowland persisted. Using a series of scale models and tanks filled with water, he demonstrated how angles and lines could distort perspective, making a ship seem closer, further, or even heading in a direction it was not. U-boat commanders relied heavily on visual estimates of distance and speed. If the human eye could be confused, the torpedoes might miss. The concept was simple, yet revolutionary. A war fought not just with weapons, but with perception. In early tests, Rowland painted small ships with stripes and geometric patterns. Navy officers observed through periscopes, timing the apparent speed of the vessels. The results were encouraging. Torpedoes aimed at the models often fell short or overshot, deceived by the clever distortions. Rowland's confidence grew, but the question remained. Could it work on the open ocean against seasoned German submariners? By mid-1942, the first full-scale trials began. Merchant ships, stripped of cargo and fitted with test patterns, sailed from British ports under the watchful eyes of observers. Each ship bore a unique design. Some had bold diagonal stripes, others jagged black and white patches, and some were covered in curves and angles that seemed chaotic at first glance. The objective was not beauty, it was deception. Rowland and his team meticulously recorded observations. From the deck of accompanying naval ships, they tracked how enemy observers might perceive the test vessels. The results were astonishing. Ships that had once been easy targets now seemed to dance on the waves, appearing closer, further away, or even moving in strange angles. Even experienced naval officers admitted that the patterns made judgment difficult. What was once straightforward, estimating speed and distance, was now fraught with uncertainty. Word of the success reached the Admiralty, and the Navy, initially skeptical, gave permission to implement the system on operational convoys. By late 1942, dozens of merchant ships were painted with dazzle camouflage before setting out across the Atlantic. Submarine sightings were frequent, and the results were immediately apparent. Some U-boat commanders, expecting to find straight, predictable targets, misjudged distances and angles, missing their torpedoes by yards, sometimes miles. Lives were saved, and supplies reached Britain that might otherwise have been lost. Despite the effectiveness, the idea remained controversial. Many military leaders questioned the logic. Painting a ship in bright, contrasting colors seemed counterintuitive. Roland faced criticism and ridicule from some quarters, but he had allies among the sailors. Seamen who sailed on the camouflage ships reported feeling a subtle sense of confidence. They knew the patterns might confuse the enemy, and that knowledge, however psychological, mattered in a war where morale was as important as metal and firepower. The designs themselves became an art form in miniature. Naval artists collaborated with Roland, experimenting with new shapes and patterns. Some patterns made a ship appear longer, others shorter. Some suggested movement in a completely different direction. Each ship was unique. Uniformity was the enemy of deception. The psychological element was as crucial as the visual. U-boat commanders, seeing a fleet of vessels with bizarre, disorienting patterns, could not rely solely on instinct or experience. Roland also understood the limits of his innovation. Camouflage could not make a ship truly invisible. Fog, night, radar, and sonar still posed threats. But he realized that by manipulating perception, even fleetingly, a ship could gain precious seconds to evade attack. In wartime, seconds could mean survival. That principle guided every brushstroke, every line, every choice of pattern. By 1943, dazzle camouflage was implemented widely across the British fleet. Convoys across the Atlantic began to feature ships painted with bold geometric designs, zigzags, and disruptive colors. Reports indicated that U-boat attacks were less effective. Torpedoes frequently missed, fired too early or too late, miscalculating distance and speed. While it was impossible to quantify exactly how many lives were saved, the effect on the morale of both sailors and commanders was undeniable. The success of the program inspired other Allied nations. American ships began experimenting with similar techniques, adapting the designs to their fleets. The concept was not limited to aesthetics or theory. It had become a tactical tool, an essential part of naval strategy, and yet the man behind it remained relatively unknown outside military circles. Dr. Roland was quiet, meticulous, and devoted to his work, uninterested in fame. His goal was simple: make the sea safer for those transporting vital supplies, and do so with intellect rather than brute force. Historians later noted the significance of Roland's work. Dazzle camouflage, while unconventional, highlighted the importance of perception in warfare. It demonstrated that innovation did not always come from bigger weapons or heavier armor, but from understanding the human mind. The war had often been measured in tonnage sunk and lives lost, yet here was proof that thinking differently could alter outcomes in subtle but critical ways. Sailors who served on dazzle-painted ships recalled the experience vividly. "It felt strange at first," one veteran later wrote, "to see our own ship look like a moving abstract painting. But when we learned it confused the enemy, we took pride in it. That strange artwork saved lives." The combination of science, artistry, and strategy made the system unique, a rare example where imagination directly influenced survival in war. Roland's legacy was subtle but enduring. His experiments influenced post-war naval design, teaching a generation of engineers the importance of psychological deception in addition to physical defense. His work was a reminder that sometimes the greatest victories were won not through strength, but through cleverness and insight. In the cold Atlantic waters, amidst waves, wind, and danger, his crazy idea had made a tangible difference, saving lives and cargo that would fuel the Allied war effort. In the end, the image of convoys sailing under bizarre, disorienting patterns became iconic, not for beauty, but for ingenuity. A ship, painted in jagged stripes and angular shapes, carried more than goods. It carried hope, innovation, and the proof that even in the darkest hours, a single mind could turn an ocean into a canvas of survival. That was the power of a single idea, a daring experiment, and a scientist unafraid to challenge conventional wisdom. The Atlantic convoys, in their strange, painted brilliance, became a testament to the belief that even in war, creativity, insight, and the courage to pursue a crazy idea. The success of the initial trials in British waters brought a cautious optimism to the Admiralty. While skepticism still lingered among some high-ranking officers, the evidence was difficult to ignore. Reports from the Atlantic convoys suggested that U-boat attacks were less precise, and some merchant vessels that had once been considered easy prey were surviving encounters that would previously have been disastrous. Dr. Arthur Rowland, the quiet scientist with an unassuming demeanor, found himself thrust into the center of naval attention. His lab in London became a hub of activity, filled with assistants, artists, and officers eager to understand and implement his methods. Rowland's process had evolved from a single ship model to a systematic approach. Each vessel was analyzed individually, taking into account its size, shape, and typical cargo load. He developed intricate patterns designed not merely to dazzle the eye, but to mislead it. Triangles, spirals, and jagged lines were applied in such a way that from a distance, a ship could appear to be moving faster, slower, or even in a different direction than it actually was. The patterns were chaotic, yet deliberate, a blend of scientific calculation and artistic intuition. To refine the designs, Rowland employed scale models, sometimes no larger than a shoebox, and placed them in pools and tanks that simulated sea conditions. Observers, often naval officers, watched from above, recording how the miniature vessels appeared to move through the water. Adjustments were made repeatedly. Lines shifted, angles changed, contrasts heightened or softened, until the illusions achieved the maximum effect. What worked on a model could then be adapted to the full-size ships preparing for convoys. As the year progressed, the challenge expanded. The Atlantic was vast, unpredictable, and often merciless. Ships faced not only U-boats, but storms, fog, and the constant threat of air attacks. Rowland recognized that his patterns could only achieve so much. The human element remained critical. He began training crews to understand how their ship's appearances could deceive an enemy. Sailors learned to position themselves on deck, adjusting their visibility at different times of day, while captains altered courses in subtle ways to complement the visual deception. It became a dance of psychology and strategy, as much about confidence and morale as it was about visual trickery. One of the earliest operational successes occurred on a convoy bound for Liverpool in late 1942. The HMS Endeavour had been fitted with a particularly complex design, a series of jagged black and white stripes intended to create the illusion of a ship moving diagonally across the waves. Early in the voyage, a German U-boat was spotted stalking the convoy. Through periscopes, the submarine commander attempted to estimate the Endeavour's speed and heading. His calculations, influenced by the dazzle pattern, were off by nearly 200 yards. The torpedoes fired missed their mark entirely, and the Endeavour sailed on unscathed. The crew, though not aware of the specifics, felt an unspoken confidence. They were safer, if only subtly, because of the patterns Rowland had devised. Encouraged by such reports, the Admiralty authorized an expansion of the program. Hundreds of merchant ships were repainted in dazzle camouflage, each receiving individualized patterns. The work was painstaking. Painters had to follow precise blueprints to ensure the patterns achieved the desired optical effects. It was labor-intensive, often taking weeks to complete a single ship. Yet the outcome justified the effort. Convoys reported that U-boat attacks were becoming increasingly unreliable. Commanders noted that torpedoes often fell short or passed harmlessly astern, misjudged by distorted perspective and deceptive angles. Not everyone in the Navy embraced the program enthusiastically. Some officers dismissed it as superficial, even bordering on the ridiculous. "We are at war," one grumbled during a briefing, "not in an art gallery." Yet the evidence spoke louder than skepticism. Operational reports, cross-referenced with U-boat records captured after attacks, confirmed that dazzle camouflage was disrupting enemy targeting in a measurable way. Rowland's so-called crazy idea was quietly proving its worth. Meanwhile, the artistic dimension of dazzle camouflage gained recognition. Naval artists collaborated closely with Rowland, applying principles of contrast, perspective, and geometry to each vessel. While the primary goal was functional, the designs often possessed an eerie beauty when viewed from a distance or photographed. Geometric shapes fractured the lines of the hull.
angular motifs suggested motion, and bold contrasts made identification and distance estimation by the enemy extremely difficult. Some patterns were almost hypnotic, creating illusions that could only be appreciated by those trained to observe them. The psychological impact on the sailors was significant also. Being aboard a dazzle-painted ship brought a sense of reassurance. They knew that the appearance of their vessel could mislead the enemy, and this knowledge instilled courage in dangerous waters. The concept that a painted pattern could protect lives was revolutionary in itself, blending science and art into practical defense. Captains instructed crews on how to maximize the effect, how to approach different lighting conditions, how to position the ship relative to the sun, and how to maintain the pattern's integrity despite harsh weather and wear. Rowland's work caught the attention of the wider Allied powers. Reports were shared with American naval authorities, who began to experiment with similar techniques. While the Americans adapted the designs to their larger fleets and different operational needs, the core principles remained unchanged: distort the enemy's perception, manipulate optical assumptions, and exploit human error. The collaboration marked a rare intersection of science, art, and warfare on an international scale. As the war progressed, the U-boat threat evolved. German submariners became increasingly skilled, employing new tactics and technologies. Yet dazzle camouflage continued to prove effective, particularly when combined with evasive maneuvering and convoy coordination. Rowland understood that no single measure was infallible. His work was part of a larger strategy, one in which perception, intelligence, and timing were as crucial as firepower. Operational feedback drove continuous refinement. Patterns were adjusted for different ship sizes, weather conditions, and lighting situations. Crews reported that certain designs were more effective in fog, while others performed best under bright sunlight. Rowland maintained meticulous records, documenting the interaction between visual deception and tactical outcomes. These records later became a vital resource for historians and naval strategists, illustrating the intersection of creativity and practical defense in wartime innovation. The success of dazzle camouflage had unexpected effects on morale beyond the ships themselves. Naval headquarters in London reported increased confidence among convoy organizers and commanders. Knowing that ships were harder to target, even marginally, allowed planners to allocate resources more effectively and reduce anxiety among crews. The visual ingenuity of the program became a quiet psychological weapon, undermining enemy confidence while bolstering Allied resolve. By 1944, dazzle camouflage had become a standard practice for Allied merchant fleets, particularly in high-risk zones of the Atlantic. The program's reach extended from Britain to North America, integrating both research and operational experience. Rowland, though largely unrecognized outside naval circles, had transformed what was initially considered a frivolous artistic experiment into a strategic component of maritime warfare. His work exemplified the potential of innovative thinking in times of crisis, where unconventional ideas could yield tangible, life-saving results. As the war moved toward its climax, the effectiveness of dazzle-painted ships continued to be noted in operational reports. Torpedo strikes were increasingly erratic, and U-boat commanders expressed frustration at misjudged distances and misread angles. The psychological advantage gained through these painted illusions complemented traditional defenses, contributing to the eventual success of Allied supply lines. In countless accounts, veterans recalled that the sight of a dazzle-painted ship offered reassurance, a visual signal that science and creativity were at work on their behalf. By the end of 1944, dazzle camouflage had firmly established its place in naval strategy. While the war was far from over and losses still occurred, the program's contribution to convoy survival was undeniable. Rowland's work stood as a testament to the power of unconventional thinking, showing that even in the darkest hours of global conflict, imagination and insight could alter outcomes in meaningful ways. The Atlantic convoys, navigating storm-tossed waters and evading U-boats, became a moving testament to ingenuity. Each stripe, angle.
By 1945, the war in Europe was nearing its conclusion. The Atlantic convoys had grown more secure, and the relentless threat of U-boats, while still present, had diminished thanks to a combination of technology, strategy, and the clever application of dazzle camouflage.
Dr. Arthur Rowland, now recognized quietly within the Admiralty and among naval circles, reflected on the impact of his work. His patterns had become standard on merchant ships, a subtle but powerful tool that saved countless lives and ensured the flow of critical supplies to Britain during its darkest hours. As Europe began to rebuild, the significance of Rowland's contribution extended beyond wartime tactics. The war had shown that innovation could emerge in unexpected ways, and that a single mind, willing to challenge convention, could change the course of events. Rowland's focus on perception and psychology, rather than brute force, offered lessons that would resonate in peacetime as much as in conflict. In the immediate post-war years, many naval scientists and engineers turned their attention to reconstruction and development. Rowland himself participated in debriefings and technical committees, sharing insights on visual deception and operational strategy. His techniques, initially developed for the desperate circumstances of wartime survival, were adapted for peacetime applications, including navigational safety, ship recognition, and the design of coastal installations. The artistic aspect of dazzle camouflage also gained appreciation. Exhibitions were organized to display photographs of the painted ships, highlighting the intricate designs and their practical purposes. Observers were fascinated by the combination of science and creativity, noting that these patterns, while functional, possessed an unexpected aesthetic appeal. Naval historians later recognized that the patterns exemplified the innovative spirit that had emerged in response to extreme adversity. Rowland, however, remained modest about his achievements. He was more interested in mentoring the next generation of scientists and engineers, emphasizing the importance of curiosity, observation, and the willingness to pursue unconventional ideas. He encouraged young researchers to experiment with optical illusions, perception, and the psychological dimensions of warfare, teaching them that understanding the human mind was as critical as understanding machines. Meanwhile, the effectiveness of dazzle camouflage continued to influence naval design and strategy. Lessons learned from its implementation informed approaches to ship identification, signaling, and visual communication. The principle of manipulating perception became an essential component of naval training programs, reinforcing the idea that survival at sea depended not only on firepower and armor, but also on ingenuity and mental acuity. In the United States, similar concepts were explored, influenced by Rowland's findings. American naval architects studied the British patterns, adapting them to larger fleets and different operational theaters, including the Pacific. The collaboration between Allied scientists and engineers fostered an exchange of ideas that strengthened naval capabilities across the board. Visual deception became part of a broader strategy, integrated with radar, sonar, and convoy tactics to create a multi-layered defense system against submarine threats. The personal impact of dazzle camouflage on sailors was profound. Veterans recounted that the sight of a dazzle-painted ship offered reassurance, a visual signal that science and ingenuity were at work to protect them. The patterns disrupted enemy targeting and provided a psychological boost, reinforcing confidence among crews and officers alike. This subtle advantage, though intangible, contributed significantly to morale, illustrating the complex interplay between perception, psychology, and survival in wartime conditions. Rowland's influence extended beyond naval applications. His work inspired studies in camouflage and visual deception in other military branches, including aircraft and ground operations. The fundamental principles he demonstrated, breaking up outlines, manipulating contrast, and exploiting human perceptual biases, were applied in various contexts, highlighting the versatility and enduring relevance of his approach. In the immediate post-war years, Rowland documented his findings meticulously, producing reports and manuals that would serve as references for decades. These documents detailed not only the technical aspects of pattern design, but also the experimental methods, observational techniques, and theoretical underpinnings of visual deception. Scholars and military historians would later study these materials to understand the innovative strategies employed during the war and their implications for future conflicts. The legacy of dazzle camouflage also permeated popular culture. Photographs of striped, jagged, and angular ships appeared in magazines, newspapers, and exhibitions, capturing public imagination. Artists and designers drew inspiration from the bold patterns, integrating elements of optical illusion into commercial and industrial design. What had begun as a practical measure of survival became a cultural phenomenon, illustrating the intersection of science, art, and human creativity. As ships stabilized and shipping returned to peacetime routines, the practical application of dazzle patterns declined, yet their lessons endured. Rowland continued to advise naval authorities, emphasizing the importance of adaptability, observation, and the innovative use of available resources. His philosophy, that careful study of perception could yield strategic advantages, remained influential, guiding both military training and civilian applications in the years to come. Rowland himself aged quietly, content with the knowledge that his work had made a difference. He visited shipyards, laboratories, and academic institutions, sharing stories of the Atlantic convoys and the development of dazzle camouflage. He spoke not of personal glory, but of the collective effort: the painters who executed the designs, the sailors who trusted them, and the officers who implemented them. Each role was essential, and each contributed to the survival of countless individuals during a perilous time. By the 1950s, the memory of dazzle-painted convoys had become a symbol of ingenuity and resilience. Veterans recounted their experiences with vivid detail, describing the unusual sight of geometric patterns on massive steel hulls slicing through the gray Atlantic waves. Photographers captured these images, preserving the visual legacy of the innovation for future generations. The ships, once feared targets, had become icons of cleverness, evidence that human creativity could triumph over brute force. Rowland's contributions were recognized in small, meaningful ways. Naval societies, historical associations, and scientific committees acknowledged his role in improving convoy survival rates and advancing the understanding of visual deception. While he never sought fame, the respect of peers and the gratitude of those whose lives had been protected provided a quiet, enduring reward. The principles behind dazzle camouflage continued to influence military strategy and design. New research in visual perception, camouflage, and deception drew upon Rowland's foundational work. Analysts and designers studied how patterns could manipulate observer judgment, applying these lessons to radar countermeasures, vehicle concealment, and aerial operations. In this way, a wartime innovation found relevance long after the conflict had ended, demonstrating the lasting impact of thoughtful, science-based ingenuity. In the decades that followed, Rowland's story became a case study in the value of unconventional thinking. Military academies included his methods in curricula, emphasizing that innovation often arises from questioning assumptions and exploring overlooked possibilities. The Atlantic convoys, with their dazzle-painted ships, served as a tangible example of how intellect, creativity, and careful observation could protect lives and influence outcomes in ways that traditional approaches might not. Even as technology advanced and warfare evolved, the fundamental lessons endured. Human perception remained fallible, and clever manipulation of visual cues could provide strategic advantages. Rowland's experiments demonstrated that understanding the observer's mind was as critical as understanding the machinery of war itself. His work bridged the gap between art and science, theory and practice, proving that survival could hinge as much on insight as on firepower. In reflecting on the full impact of his career, Rowland often considered the Atlantic convoys and the countless sailors who had relied on his patterns. He understood that the painted lines and angles were more than simple designs. They represented hope, protection, and the careful application of knowledge in the service of life. In every safe crossing, in every cargo delivered, and in every misjudged torpedo, his vision had left an indelible mark. The story of dazzle camouflage and of the British scientist who conceived it is ultimately a story of human ingenuity. It illustrates that even amidst chaos and destruction, creativity can find a place, that careful observation and imaginative thinking can yield solutions where brute force cannot. It is a testament to the enduring power of intellect, courage, and the willingness to pursue ideas that others may initially dismiss as crazy. And so, as ships sailed once more across the Atlantic, free from the immediate threat of unseen predators beneath the waves, the legacy.
By 1946, the war had ended, and Europe was beginning the slow, painful process of reconstruction. The Atlantic convoys, once lifelines of survival, were no longer under constant threat. The U-boats had been neutralized, ports reopened, and merchant shipping gradually returned to peacetime operations. Yet the legacy of the war and of the ingenious techniques that had protected so many lingered. Among them was dazzle camouflage, the brainchild of a single British scientist, Dr. Arthur Rowland, whose vision had reshaped naval strategy and saved countless lives. In the post-war period, Rowland found himself called upon by a new generation of engineers and naval strategists. His insights into visual deception were no longer a secret confined to operational convoys. They were now subjects of formal study. Naval colleges incorporated his findings into curricula, teaching students that perception could be manipulated just as effectively as any weapon or armor. The principles he had developed in the midst of desperate wartime need became timeless lessons in strategy and human psychology. Rowland often reflected on the practical challenges he had faced. Designing dazzle patterns had required a delicate balance of science and art. Patterns had to be disruptive enough to mislead enemy eyes, but not so chaotic that they confused friendly observers or impaired crew operations. Ships varied in size, shape, and cargo, and each required a tailored approach. Weather conditions, sunlight angles, and viewing distance all affected how a pattern performed. Through years of meticulous testing, observation, and adaptation, Rowland had learned to anticipate and compensate for these variables. One striking aspect of his post-war work involved the archival documentation of patterns and outcomes. Every design, every convoy report, and every anecdote from sailors was meticulously cataloged. Rowland sought to create a comprehensive record not only for historical purposes, but also to inform future innovations. He understood that the lessons learned during wartime could have applications beyond immediate survival, influencing peacetime naval design, training, and even civilian maritime practices. In collaboration with Allied counterparts, Rowland helped analyze the efficacy of dazzle camouflage in a variety of contexts. The American Navy, for example, applied similar principles to their Pacific fleets, experimenting with patterns suited to different lighting, ocean conditions, and ship configurations. Comparative studies revealed fascinating insights into how human perception could be exploited, not maliciously, but strategically, to enhance safety and effectiveness. The international collaboration emphasized the universal applicability of his methods. Beyond the technical realm, the psychological dimension of dazzle camouflage became a subject of fascination. Sailors who had served aboard these ships spoke of a sense of reassurance and confidence, a subtle but meaningful boost to morale. The knowledge that their vessel could appear deceptive to the enemy provided comfort amidst uncertainty. In post-war interviews, veterans often described the patterns with a mix of admiration and nostalgia, recalling the almost surreal beauty of geometric shapes on steel hulls slicing through fog and waves. As Rowland aged, he continued to advocate for the integration of perception-based strategies into broader military and civilian applications. He lectured on the importance of understanding how human observers interpret visual information,
stressing that even the most technologically advanced defenses could be complemented by simple, intelligent manipulation of sight. His approach bridged the gap between art and science, demonstrating that innovation could arise from the intersection of multiple disciplines. The cultural impact of dazzle camouflage also became evident. Photographs and newsreels of the striking patterns were exhibited in galleries and museums, attracting attention not only for their historical significance, but also for their aesthetic appeal. Designers and artists drew inspiration from the bold shapes and contrasts, incorporating elements of optical illusion into commercial and industrial design. What had begun as a life-saving tactical measure had transcended its original purpose, leaving an imprint on post-war visual culture. In practical terms, the adaptation of dazzle principles influenced coastal architecture, signage, and vehicle design. Engineers experimented with using patterns to improve visibility, create depth perception effects, or reduce misidentification in complex environments. Rowland's philosophy, leveraging human perception to achieve practical outcomes, proved applicable far beyond the decks of merchant ships. The broader lesson was clear: the mind, and the way it interprets the world, could be as powerful a tool as any mechanical system. Rowland remained humble throughout these developments. He rarely sought personal recognition, content instead to see his work applied effectively. Colleagues and historians would later note that his greatest contribution was not merely the creation of dazzle patterns, but the demonstration that unconventional thinking, rooted in careful observation and rigorous testing, could have profound consequences. His vision exemplified the power of curiosity, persistence, and the courage to pursue ideas others might dismiss as fanciful or impractical. By the late 1940s, some of the original dazzle-painted ships were retired, yet their influence persisted. Veterans' memoirs, naval records, and photographic archives preserved the story of a fleet that had appeared both threatening and disorienting to the enemy. A fleet that owed its survival, in part, to the clever manipulation of perception. Historians studying the period emphasized that such innovations, though subtle, had tangible impacts on the outcome of critical supply missions. Rowland's legacy also extended to education. He mentored a generation of naval engineers, artists, and strategists, instilling in them an appreciation for interdisciplinary problem-solving. He taught that understanding human perception could enhance both safety and operational effectiveness, whether in combat situations or in civilian applications. His influence shaped practices and philosophies in naval science long after the last torpedo had been fired and the Atlantic convoys had returned to peacetime routines. The story of dazzle camouflage became emblematic of the ingenuity required during World War II. While technology and firepower were essential, the war had demonstrated that creativity, psychological insight, and meticulous experimentation could be equally critical. Rowland's work was a testament to the idea that survival often depended on thinking differently, challenging assumptions, and applying intellect in practical, life-saving ways. In reflecting on his career, Rowland often considered the men who had sailed aboard dazzle-painted ships. Their trust, bravery, and willingness to embrace unconventional measures had made the success of his patterns possible. Each convoy that arrived safely, each ton of vital cargo delivered, was a validation of years of careful study and tireless experimentation. The impact of his work could be measured not only in tactical effectiveness, but in human lives preserved. Even decades later, the principles behind dazzle camouflage continued to inspire innovation. Scholars of military history and visual perception examined the effectiveness of pattern-based deception, exploring its potential in modern defense applications. Rowland's methods provided enduring lessons in the importance of observation, experimentation, and the intelligent use of visual cues. The Atlantic convoys, with their boldly painted ships, had left an indelible mark on naval strategy, perception science, and cultural memory. The final legacy of Dr. Arthur Rowland and his Dazzle camouflage program is one of intellect, creativity, and practical ingenuity. By exploiting the weaknesses and assumptions inherent in human perception, he had provided a subtle, yet powerful form of protection to countless sailors. His work exemplifies the idea that sometimes the most effective solutions are not those that rely on brute force, but those that engage the mind, transforming ordinary objects into instruments of survival. Through photographs, veterans' accounts, and historical records, the story of dazzle-painted ships endures. The jagged lines, stark contrasts, and angular patterns are more than visual curiosities. They are symbols of resilience, ingenuity, and the transformative power of a single idea. In every safe crossing, in every successful convoy, and in every story told afterward, the influence of Dr. Arthur Rowland is felt. A testament to a revolutionary approach that combines science, art, and human insight to change the course of history. Even in peacetime, the lessons endure. Modern naval and civilian design continue to draw from principles first tested in the desperate hours of World War II. Rowland's vision, once considered eccentric, now serves as a reminder that creativity, careful observation, and the courage to explore unconventional ideas could yield results far beyond what anyone initially imagined. The Atlantic convoys may have sailed into history, but the ingenuity that protected them remains timeless, a legacy of intellect and foresight that continues.